How far would you go to travel back in time? This married woman had to cheat on her husband with a former classmate in order to attend her high school reunion. A married woman was discovered having an extramarital affair with her high school boyfriend. But even that isn't the most stunning aspect. When the husband learned of it, he made the decision to take matters into his own hands. Needless to say, his retaliation was not to be taken lightly. Watch this space for the complete tale. Men today take picking a suit or a car considerably more seriously than they do selecting a woman. As a result, divorce rates continue to rise, which has a negative impact on the happiness of the children. I'm not sure where I first heard that saying, but it's absolutely accurate. Most often, cheating on one's spouse is the cause of divorce these days. And if adultery by males is frowned upon by everybody, particularly when it involves women, then adultery by women is sometimes excused by the exact same women. There are many excuses. My spouse is a dictator. He doesn't view me as a woman. He isn't loving. He isn't content in an intimate sense, and so on. Adultery frequently causes a woman's brain to shut down. She just relies on her thoughts and emotions and doesn't consider the repercussions. In my perspective, a woman's infidelity is far scarier than a man's. A lady who cheats on her husband, her parents, her children, and most importantly herself, kills her whole family. One thing unites all betrayals: someone will eventually find out about them. And treason typically has a single outcome. Rarely is it possible to create something fresh out of the sorrow of losing loved ones. It is quite difficult to construct unhappiness. After some time has passed, an attempt to return to the family signals the start of the second stage of infidelity. I was a fool. I can't live without you and the kids. I only love you, and so on. The conclusion differs. The wayward wife is either accepted or not. But regardless of the outcome, such a family will never be happy. When I was 20 years old, I married the woman I adored. She was my age, and the future of our family appeared straightforward and uncomplicated to me. Following all the established conventions of the genre, our love affair was growing. We dated for over a year before getting married after meeting at a friend's birthday celebration. I fell in love with her the first time I ever did a lady. When my parents voiced uncertainty about our impending nuptials, I promised to get my luggage and head straight to her. Anyway, we tied the knot. A boy was born the next year, and a girl the following 3. My wife's name, Olga, is one that I particularly adore. The emotion got stronger and stronger with time. She never provided a reason, so I had no reason to believe that she was cheating. Instead of being ashamed by envy like everyone else, I had total faith in her. We occasionally argued, but we never yelled at one another. We swiftly reached a consensus and established peace. For 17 years, that is how we lived, and then things started to become worse. Olga instantly grew agitated, created rumors, and on a deserted street, she unexpectedly changed her appearance and became a brunette, well aware that I never liked this kind of woman. She purchased perfume and new clothing. My wife started staying late at work on a daily basis and giving ridiculous justifications. Our personal relationships came to an abrupt end. Such modifications to family life could not just occur. As I gave it some thought, I realized that it all began following the reunion. Therefore, something at that reunion had altered my wife so drastically. I chose to carefully probe some of her classmates whom I knew about the reunion. They taught me a lot of fascinating facts about my wife. It turns out that Olga had a crush on Sasha, a classmate, while they were still in school. He had a good appearance, and his classmates loved him. After graduation, life separated them. He moved away to study in another city. He had a child there after being married to the plant director's daughter. Olga was in mourning before she would meet. As a result, they lived in parallel lives in several cities up to Sasha's move to ours, when they accidentally met again. When they met, an old love rekindled. Generally speaking, a relatively common and commonplace circumstance. That night, they couldn't help sharing a bed. Olga was seeking any justification to spend time with her beloved. She came up with justifications that any undercover agent would have invited. I already knew Olga's lover's name and address. To cover the lovers on the hot substance and end the conversation was all that needed to be done. I have to admit that I felt awful. Knowing that my wife was being used caused me to feel uneasy while yet loving Olga. The other man gave me no chance of continuing my life with her. But even so, I chose to first speak with his wife before deciding how to proceed with our family. I directly questioned her about the lover. She responded by going into hysterics, accusing me of all the misdeeds and, most significantly, of his ruined life, which caused a big scandal for me. In addition to ruining her life, I ventured to doubt her integrity about women out of malice. After a few more days of waiting, I finally made it to my lover's address one evening when she was once more running late for work. He himself opened the door for me. He gestured in the direction of the kitchen in response to my query. Where? Olga was sipping tea while sitting with one leg up on a stool. She sort of cringed when she saw me and exclaimed furiously, "Why did you come? I love him." There was no preface. I basically understood everything, but I gave it one final go and attempted to remind her of the kids. She did, however, promise that the kids would stay with her and her new partner. But until they got their life together, let them stay with me for a bit. I no longer wanted or had the energy to carry on this debate. I informed my wife that this was the last time we would talk about it and that I would stop doing so. Personally, I would seek a divorce. Olga signaled to me that our chat was finished by turning away. I quietly closed the door to the staircase, descended the steps, and exited the apartment. Outside it was pouring rain. I raised my collar and strolled past the soggy homes. I well recall that evening, the final evening of my marriage to Olga. My spirit as well as my heart ached. Maybe I should have persisted. Perhaps I ought to have spoken up for my wife and worked to win her back. But something told me she wouldn't return, so it was all in vain. Once more, she was in front of me with strangers' vacant, uncaring eyes. I told my kids that my mother had left on a protracted business trip when I got home. Despite knowing that I would eventually have to, I dared not reveal the truth to my children. But when my dumpster questioned, "Mom left for another husband," I nodded. We sat there into the night after he gave me a hug. My divorce was filed the next day. There were 2 months. There was still a ton of bureaucracy to navigate. We had time to make amends. I share a home with the kids. Olga had been delaying their happiness with a new father all these time. My ex-wife came to me one evening. She said to me, "Please forgive me, do what you want with me, but just don't persecute me," after telling me she had left her Sasha because she realized she had never loved anyone else but me. She spoke as I listened in silence, telling her that her ex-husband had passed away that very night at her lover's apartment. I said that I would never live with her, but that I would not stop her from seeing her kids. Olga gave me a tear-filled gaze as she said, "I recognized in them regret, grief, and the previous love of the last." I was able to maintain my composure. Olga departed the same night. She tried to do something terribly horrible by taking drugs. However, a neighbor dialed 911. Olga is now safe. From the hospital, her parents brought her home. She phoned me several times and begged for my forgiveness, but I remained steadfast despite how badly my heart and soul suffered. I knew I would never be able to love someone the same way again, but I still loved her. Olga now resided with her parents, visited her kids frequently, and made an effort to build some sort of connection with me in the hopes that I would still pardon her and we could be together. However, I'll never be able to forget such offenses. That is the tale of our story's hero. Don't forget to subscribe and like it and share your thoughts in the comments. You have a lot of captivating stories to read. Well, I hope you have a good day as always. And warmest wishes for you. I appreciate your attention. Another instance of adultery begins to surface as the first astonishing narrative draws to an end. This time, the story concerns a wife who believed she could get away with having an unidentified girlfriend while cheating on her husband. She had no idea that her husband was watching her every step and had prepared the ultimate retaliation. Prepare yourself for a roller coaster trip as we reveal the sultry specifics of this liaison and the violent retaliation that followed. I've always been very serious about marriage, possibly even too serious. Although I must admit that many ladies attempted, I never left my wife since I did not see anybody else in the area but my one and only wife, and there was neither a need nor a desire to do so. At a friend's wedding in the early 1990s, I met the woman who would become my wife among the guests and fell in love with her right away. After 6 months of dating her, we decided to be married. We were ecstatic after our little wedding. She divorced her ex-husband a year before we met. Our marriage was her second. Things did not work out. Because I didn't want to bother her with inquiries, and because she didn't say much herself, I refrained from interrogating her. I was very fortunate to have a wife who was attractive, intelligent, and a wonderful hostess. She was a doctor and employed by the military when we were married, and the entire nation was in a state of constant chaos. In addition to my primary job, I was able to work 2 additional jobs, which wasn't too awful because I really wanted my family to be without need. My wife and I had been incredibly close since the day we first met. I was very sensitive to her, loved her fervently, and carried her about for hours. After 2 years of marriage, we were still unable to start a family. She was quite distressed by this and prophesied to me that I would leave her as a result of her infertility. Her fallopian tube was found to be blocked. She suffered a horrible loss as a result, but I didn't give up. I remained by her, encouraged her, calmed her down, and reminded her that she was my destiny and that I loved her more than life itself. I told her that I could take care of everything to help her succeed in life as a mother, since modern medicine has a lot of capabilities. I was willing to sacrifice myself only to make her happy, since she believed me and smiled at me. At the time, I put in a lot of work, I had a goal, and I persisted in visiting her. I need money for a variety of medical procedures, including surgeries in various clinics, consultations with various witch doctors, and other procedures. Every time I thought things would finally fall into place this time, my wife would become pregnant and we would start to recover properly, but nothing ever did. It nearly took 5 years. My wife gave up and put up with it, but I never lost hope and kept going because I still believed in miracles. My wife's strength came from my enthusiasm. She always assured me that being with me was simple and that she could face tomorrow with bravery and assurance. She was my strong backbone and my unshakable stronghold, and I had to live my life for her because I thought she was the one for whom I was born. If she's there, I'll be able to go through anything and do anything. After reading an article on the Human Reproduction Institute and the potential for artificial insemination, my wife and I were inspired to continue working toward our objective. I was prepared to upend the world and more certain than ever that we would prevail this time. By my standards at the time, the procedure itself and the recovery period were exceedingly expensive, so I started looking for a means to get the money necessary. We have no particular options because it is a tiny town, but I managed to spot an advertisement in one magazine that said, "The Reserve Soldiers. We encourage you to serve on contract, great salary, and all that." In general, workers were hired to perform specific tasks in specific locations and were paid well for their job. God did not spare my health when I had the opportunity to serve in the Marines for real. I didn't burn for anyone's political interests since, of course. I wasn't crazed about any specific patriotic views. Instead, I merely required money and resources to go toward my wife and I's aim. I gave it some thinking and ultimately chose to take a chance. My wife sobbed and begged me not to leave. She was scared and declared that she wouldn't want the money if something happened to me. I told her that, regrettably, none of us were born into wealthy families, and that no one would ever give us anything for free in this world unless you came and took it yourself. We need this money, not for frivolous things like souvenirs, but for a worthwhile purpose, so I reassured her that everything would be well. Generally speaking, I traveled to far-off countries, was away from home for a long time, but I was fortunate enough to return with what was required, did not sleep, and did not carry sins on my spirit. Then, after an operation, my wife and I went to the hospital, where a miracle that we had been praying for such a long time finally materialized. She became pregnant. I was overjoyed and congratulated her. My kid was born quickly. We were ecstatic to the max. I almost did everything around the house, assisted my wife with the baby, and basically floated on wings without noticing any problems. My wife described me as a perpetual motion machine, and because of the amount of energy I was exuding, I truly wanted to protect her and my baby. I quickly secured a decent career with stability and began making a nice living. We spent all of our spare time together. I dressed my wife very properly, got her a vehicle, moved to a large apartment, traveled to the seas and oceans every year. In an effort to keep my daughters entertained, I attempted to schedule my leisure time, outings to the countryside, movies, skiing, skating, and other activities. When I go back to those times, it feels like our street was the candy truck rolling over, and we deserved it. Our 14-year marriage ended up not being as blissful as I had anticipated. My family always came first, and all I did was only for my loved ones as my kid progressively grew up. Because I respected my wife and avoided giving her any cause for complaint, I never thought that my life was routine or monotonous. If there was ever a family scandal, we first tried to come to a solution. I always made an effort to focus on her as a lady. I don't recall ever failing to express to her my love and appreciation for her. I never missed a chance to offer her a nice surprise, including flowers, presents, and numerous items deemed girlish, while we were struggling to make ends meet. She has always enjoyed it. Everything was normal in bed with my wife. I didn't act conservatively, and it appeared to me that we had complete openness and confidence in one another. In my perspective, everything was in harmony since I attempted to be considerate of all of my wife's interests. She has always maintained that I completely meet her demands and that everything is to her taste. She provided no justification for me to be envious of her, despite the fact that she worked as a doctor in a military unit with a largely male crew. I occasionally had to travel for work for a week or two, and I always looked forward to returning home to my darling, since she always welcomed me with excitement and tenderness. And after that, everything was just as in stories or movies. In a place where I had to change aircraft on a business trip one day, colleagues informed me that my job had been canceled and that I had to return home. I took an afternoon flight back to my city, grabbed some champagne and a sizable bunch of flowers, and made the decision to surprise my wife without letting her know I had returned. She was still working, in my estimation, and my kid was in school. I took a cab home, tried to open the door with the key, but it was locked from the inside. Well, that's no surprise, I thought. I started ringing the doorbell, but nothing happened. I knocked and rang, started to worry, not understanding what was happening, and wanted to call the police. But then my wife's voice asked, "Who's there?" My work trip was postponed, so I said, "Honey, you're worrying me." Even at that point, I assumed she was dozing off or even ill. I didn't recognize her when she then opened the door for me. It was a whole different individual. She was gazing through me as if I didn't exist with her strange eyes. I entered the hallway and noticed a military commander sitting in an armchair through the open door. I didn't realize my wife was covering her bare body with a robe till later. I suddenly became aware of everything. I observed that I clutched the bouquet of roses with such force that I really squeezed it through my fingers, and she whispered to me in a calm voice, "You're bleeding." My legs shook so badly for the first time in my life that I simply sat down on the ground by the entrance. It's difficult for me to put into words how I felt at that very time, since I was panting, out of breath, and my mind was racing with ideas. It was almost like a dream. I couldn't believe what I was seeing because, in theory, my wife can't do it. Therefore, it didn't appear to be happening to me. She said, "We need to talk. I hope you're not going to cause a scandal. It's not his fault." But at that point, I was unable to even stand up, much less start a scandal. I now see, thank God, that I didn't do anything damaging if I had been upset, but I definitely would have if I had been. My wife and I waited in the apartment, and I saw him leave without being seen. She knelt down in front of me and whispered, "It happens in life," as she sobbed. She then began detailing all of the times she had cheated on me during our relationship. She continued, saying that the first time she had been with her ex-husband, at the beginning of our relationship, when she and I had just started dating, despite my fears that she was out to get me. She said that she purposefully sought out her ex and offered herself to him in order to show him the kind of lady he had lost. When she went to a refresher training, she later cheated on me with a military physician in another city. He was very amorous and suffering from having just divorced his wife when she offered herself to him out of sympathy. He was also reciting poetry to her. Then another military doctor appeared, but this one was already in our town. After that, she contacted the third medical professional, who I really discovered in our home. She said that they had been having an affair for about a month, and that she had been planning to end their relationship for a while, but hadn't had the time. She said that they frequently crossed paths at work, and that she is unpleasant since she ruined our home, among other things. I said, "Why did this to me?" And she cried out in a scream, saying she couldn't explain why she was doing it, that it was an uncontrollable desire, and there was no justification for it, and that I had to make the choice. She also vowed to stay true to me until she died if I could have the fortitude to forgive her. I had trouble sleeping or eating the first few days, went to work like a machine, spent my evenings in a cold sweat, drank water constantly, and smoked endlessly. My coworkers commented that I was wearing just black when I inquired what was wrong. My wife, who witnessed what was happening to me, was continually sobbing and pleading with me to forgive her. Since I had no idea what to say to her and was unable to think clearly, I chose to remain silent. Later, I tried several times to talk to my wife in order to share my soul with her in the same manner that I had done in the past and express my love for her. But I was unable to do so because I was constantly struggling with a lump in my throat that I was unable to swallow or spit out. Thus, a half year passed. During this time, I continued to reflect on our lives, dug deep inside myself in search of explanations, and gnawed myself all over with a guilt complex. The concept of having sex with my wife did not even cross my mind at this period as I emotionally and physically withdrew from her. Instead, I developed a fear of doing so. I'm not sure how to explain it, but it felt to me that I couldn't make her happy. Therefore, there was no reason to go to bed other than to make a fool of myself. We talked to her about commonplace issues, and I listened to my daughter without bias as before. At the time, she was just entering puberty, and I didn't want to upset her because she had nothing to do with the situation. Later on, the feelings vanished and the agony in my spirit lessened a little. I made the decision to talk to my wife one day and informed her that I had no ill will toward her, that I still loved her dearly, and that I would brave both fire and water for her. I explained to her that something must have changed in me as a result of what had happened, but I could not yet identify it, and that I most likely required more time to do so. I requested my wife's assurance that I would not withhold information from her if life with me was not what she had in mind. There is no need to squander time because life is just one and things could still turn out differently or with someone else. We reestablished our closeness, but not at the same level as before. I made an effort to act the same as before, but when in bed with my wife, I started to experience puzzling issues with my potency, which made me gnash my teeth even more. After another 6 years had gone, my family was always my primary priority, and I stopped worrying about whether she was cheating on me. She was equally attractive, intelligent, a wonderful hostess, and a fantastic mother. I did forgive her, That much is true, but something inside of me cracked, burnt everything in my spirit, left me feeling empty. This poison poisoned me to the bone. My invincible bulwark crumbled like a house of cards, and the sensation of new strangely didn't come. The actual meaning of the word treason is that everything changed, including myself, over time, and I became a new person. I grinned as I recalled the times when I was earning money by traveling to distant countries in order to have a daughter. After a while, I suddenly stopped feeling the inner weight that had been holding me down for so long. At the time, I had the saying inscribed on my backpack unloading: "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger." I attempted to learn and understand what was preventing me from altering my life in the past, since it was unusual, truly strange. I'm not sure. I always had a positive outlook, hoped for the best, and wished for the world to calm down and be okay. And while everything did calm down, something really significant that had been driving me ahead and giving our marriage purpose also vanished from my spirit at the same moment. I couldn't just drop everything and go, since it would be a betrayal due to my stupid obligation. However, it happened without any treachery. All of a sudden, and suddenly, my perspective toward all that had transpired changed, and I no longer felt like a traitor. When I awoke one morning, I felt as though my internal mental alterations had come to a stop. I also realized that for a considerable amount of time, I had not been living my own life at all, but rather a wholly alien one. Looking at my wife as she slept next to me, and at her face, I came to the realization that I no longer knew this person. That morning, I left my house, turned off my phone, drove around the city, and stood by the sides of the road and in the woods. It's difficult to describe, but somehow it seemed simple, and I felt free, as if I had fully atoned for all of my errors. I reflected and recalled as I grew increasingly conscious of my independence. I went back home that evening and told my wife everything. Long conversation, but no accusations were made. She sobbed and said she had been looking forward to this day for so long. Interestingly, I no longer felt sorry for her. She shared her perspective with me after I had accurately articulated mine. She repeatedly pleaded for my forgiveness, and I'd assured her that while I had done so in the past, I was no longer the guy she had married. We were together for over 23 years, and during the first 15 of those years, the tipping point, I lived exclusively for her and my daughter. The last 8 years I can hardly recall. I have lived through everything throughout this time and have never held anything against her, but a lot has changed, most notably my comprehension of and attitude regarding things. I came to the conclusion that continuing our marriage would be pointless. My kid grew up and came dangerously close to leaving the nest. My wife eventually accepted it. I believe she recognized that our paths had long before parted and that we had simply been walking side by side by inertia. To be fair though, while our lives included many positive aspects, I was content when I was in the dark because nothing was available to me. The divorce was resolved. My kid is old enough to grasp everything, so I explained everything to her. We still see her, and far more frequently than we do with my wife. The vacuum that had been echoing in my spirit for so long has vanished, and life continues on. I'm worried there isn't a permanent lady, and I don't want to. Now I am certain. Everything that does not instantly kill us renders us invalids.